It's kind of hard to see, a little red button right up here above my finger. That's the arbor lock. You press it, and you have to rotate the blade, and it'll click. Once it clicks, it's locked. Turn it the direction of that the saw will spin at, and you'll take your blade off. This one has it out front right here. It's a black pin right there. Put my finger in the way. It's a little black pin, and all the worm drives that I've dealt with have an arbor lock. Just probably because they're the newer of the saws, and they all have it. Most all of the newer direct drives have an arbor lock. They realize that, hey, when the carpenter goes to change the blade, it's a lot safer, a lot easier to do if you have that arbor lock. Okay, so make sure it's disconnected from the power source. Never start the saw when the saw blade is in contact with the material being cut. Reaching over the portable circular saw or under the portable circular saw while in operation. I know several guys who lost fingers. Well, I know a lot of guys who lost fingers. I know two that lost fingers to this saw right here. They were cutting, and your reaction if something's going to hit the ground, especially if it's material you don't want to hit the ground, is to just reach down and grab it. Well, there are those carpenters that get a lot done during the day. They don't adjust the depth of the saw. And we said if you're cutting a 2x4 with this saw and it's full depth, it's got a whole inch where that blade is sticking down. Well, they just stuck their hand right up under there, not realizing what they did. Okay. One of them, I think, was on a 2x material. Another one was on plywood. Cutting the plywood, coming to the end. Oh, I don't want it to drop down there and cut his hand. He was bringing the saw back out of the cut. Okay. If you keep both hands on the saw, it's hard to cut your hands. You can cut your partner, you can cut your leg, you can cut your foot, but you can't cut either one of those hands because they're here. Okay? Make sure if you're cutting something, it falls to the ground. Okay? Now I let go of the trigger, let it come to a stop, everything's good. It's safe. Okay? Instead of waving a moving tool around while it's running. Using a combination blade for bevel cutting, all these that we passed around with exception of this, which is probably a combination. I guess if you had to cut a piece of siding, I guess you could rotate it over. These are combination blades. And combination, if you guys have forgotten, means that you can rip, and that would be going with the grain, is a ripping procedure, and then going across the grain is a cross cutting. So those are the two operations that you can do.
Whether it's on a bevel or not.
Right, whether you put your saw on a degree for a bevel cut or not. Keeping both hands on the portable circular saw while the blade is moving. Supporting the material you are cutting. What would you expect to happen, even with this little saw, if I proceeded to cut like this? Yeah, it's going to fall. In the process of falling, what's going to happen to the blade? It's going to get pinched and kick back. You will see guys set up two sawhorses, and they'll put a board across there, and they'll proceed to cut. Whether they're first year or second year, I guarantee it. It happens every year. And hopefully an instructor's with an eye shot of it, and they can say, I wouldn't do that. Okay? You could cut off with two sawhorses if you were extending over one sawhorse to pretend, cutting there, or if you're on one sawhorse, cutting like this, it'd be fine. Okay? We don't usually clamp things down because it's so slow. What we do is have our partner hold it. If you were cutting this board, okay, and you could cut this way, it's not as safe as having two hands on the saw, by any means. Two hands, you're twice the power. And it's safer. But there's a lot of carpenters, a lot of people that do cut this way. Now, if I'm cutting, chances are this board's going to move. So I would rather see the partner hold the board, and you cut like this. If you have to cut with one person, take and tilt the board up. Now you can cut like this, and the board doesn't move. Like this, the board's going to move around the table. Does that make sense? Also, my first construction job, I had a quickie lesson on safety, and I had a really quick lesson on how to get things done fast. is that I'll cut this way a lot, especially if I have 16-foot material, whether it's a 2x12, 2x6, 2x4. This foot steps back, okay? And what I do is make sure the cord is behind me. And now, that is about a perfect angle for how I'm going to hold this saw. I don't really have to cam it much. I just have to set the saw down. And this is a heavy saw. If you're in the old days, if you were cutting all the floor joists, the last thing you want to do is lift all the floor joists off the stack that came from the lumber yard, put them on sawhorses and cut them. You either cut off the stack or you drag them over to where you're going to put them in, and then you cut like this right here. Okay? So now this part is not laying down to where it's going to pinch the blade. Okay? And this side over here is running about 12 feet out. Now, I'm not saying every one of you guys should cut that way. Some of you guys would not feel comfortable, would not feel safe. Okay? You need a procedure that's safe for you and your partner. So supporting the material you're cutting. Sawing in reverse, common sense. Wearing loose clothing while operating the portable circular saw. Sometimes we have long sleeve shirts. You either roll them up so they don't fall down into the equipment or button them up. Same with the little ties on your hood. Sometimes those hoodie ties are way down here and long here and things like that. Sawing off a 2x4 that is supported between two sawhorses. This is what we were trying to show you. You don't want to do that. Saw above your head. If you had to saw something off here, you don't have as much power in your arms as you do here. It's just the way God made you. Not much power here, not much power here. You're straining your back a little bit here. Okay? But definitely, what could you do to eliminate having to saw up here? Get a ladder. Okay? Get yourself up where you can comfortably work. And you'll learn that if you get on the upper side of the wind when you cut, you don't get all that lunch, extra breakfast and lunch in your face, all the sawdust that flies off. But you still will wear some sawdust. Picking up the saw by the cord is a no-no. Wait for the saw to completely stop before moving away from your cut. Using a GFCI and having the equipment ground on the portable circular saw. Wearing Z87 safety glasses. How many guys have their glasses ready to go? Okay. So you guys can start in. We're going to go tomorrow with some of the cutting. So we need you guys to come up with glasses. We have some extra glasses for you guys that can't come up with them by tomorrow. But you should be working on those Z87 safety glasses.
My class up, so I have some to give out, but I don't know how many. I ordered a bunch more. So.
Yeah. And we have a lot of reserve classes you can borrow. So. Adjusting the blade to the depth of a 1/4 inch below the material you're cutting. Lining up your shoulder with a portable circular saw and looking down the side of the saw blade to adjust your cut line. And that's typically what we do. We don't use the notches that they give us, even though they're kind of cute. Those little notches right there. If you can cut accurately, go for it. Okay? I found, and most of the students have found, that when you look down the side of the blade and you line up that blade with your cut line, line up your blade with the cut line, you're more accurate because you can see that line disappear. If you're like me, I put a line down, and that line, when it's cut off, the board is exactly the right length when you're done. Unless you're one of those people that cut on both sides of the line. Okay, kind of like a drunk driver. Okay. Going down the road. Wow.
I was looking at Bodie.
Oh, you're looking at Bodie.
And just Bodie just drives like that all the time.
He drives like that or saws like that? Making sure the blade guard moves freely, and if not, the saw goes to one of the instructors. Lifting the portable circular saw away from the material being cut while the blade is still moving. Okay? We don't want you to do that. We want it to stop when it's setting up on the surface of the material. Checking all locking levers and making proper adjustments before cutting while it's stopped. Inspect the material for nails, screws, and knots. Okay? We talked about this. What do you see right there? Nail holes. So what does that mean this board is? Used. So that should throw up a little red flag for you that, okay, did they bust off, which is really easy to do, did they bust off some necking screws in here? Did they sawzall a couple nails in there? Okay, so you want to check it out. If there's some nails or screws in there, come in 4 inches or so, cut it off, and then use it. And that brings up a point about conservation of materials and quality of materials. If you were to cut a foot off, let's say for something in a project you're working up on the roof and they say, hey, I need a foot of 2x4. Don't go over to the brand new spanking 2x4s that are 16 foot long and cut off a foot. Okay, some of you guys are going to be somewhere else besides in the conservation mode. We're going to have to remind you of that. We're going to have scrap piles, whether it's one spot on the job site or where one of our cut guys are at, he's going to have a bunch of scrap there. Say, use the scrap. We usually have stuff 4 foot, 3 foot, 2 foot, all different lengths. Okay, we make more money if we can use up our scraps first before we go into our big dimensional lumber. Okay, if you have a knot, let's say I needed to cut here to here is 18 inches, I've got to have 18 inches. Well, there's a knot there. 2 things can happen. One is, you're going to dull your blade because knots are super hard. The other is, that knot might go flying around the job site. Now, if it hits my partner, I'll kind of shed a little tear. But if it hits me, I might shed a lot of tears, especially when it's cold out. And I've had a lot of knots bound off. I think the worst one was like, hit me right on the lip here and drew blood. Okay. So, you could come from the other side of the board, pull in, and 18 inches might wind up here where my line's at. Okay? And it might not be so deadly for you or your partner. Okay, when I make a line, okay, I do 2 things. I make what's called a little crow's foot here. It's a slash coming off a straight line. That represents 2 things. One is it's the waist side of the board. Okay? And then the second thing is, if I make a little mark like this, and I call it fly turn, you lose that. Your partner, you might mark it and send it up, and your partner goes, where's your mark? Well, if you put a crow's foot on there, everybody can see that. And most of the time, if it's something important, I circle it, like if we're doing layout. Okay, and if I have so many circles that are wrong, then I'll put a square around it. I'll say, okay, the marks with the square are the lines you want to go with. A lot of times we're pulling different measurements and we can't agree on anything. Okay, so what we're going to expect out of you guys is practice your measuring, whether you cut the line or leave the line, both are going to be accurate. It's just that you have to work with your partner to do what's most accurate for you guys. That's it. Any questions?